All right, greetings and welcome, and thank you. Thank you for being a donor, a contributor, otherwise a supporter of ILSR's mission to make real our vision of thriving, diverse, and equitable communities by building local power and fighting corporate control. And also thank you for indulging in this effort to make our annual report a little bit more interactive and engaging and really just give a little more insight into the why behind the work that we do and to hear directly from the directors who are leading the work in each of our initiatives. Hopefully you're familiar with everyone here from our podcast or just generally keeping up with our work. But we have Brenda Platt with the Composting for a Community team, John Farrell from our Energy Democracy Initiative, Chris Mitchell, who leads our community broadband work, and no relation, Stacy Mitchell with the Independent Business Initiative. So yeah, thank you all for joining this conversation. And I think the first thing I wanted to do was really talk about, so recently in our year-end wrap-ups of the Building Local Power podcast, we've talked about just the momentum where we're at today. You know, where we're at the end of 2022 is significantly different from, you know, where we started the year, where we started the decade, where we were 10 years ago. And so maybe I'll start with you, John, because I know we actually had a decent conversation on this in a recent Building Local Power episode. Can you talk a little bit about in the energy space, in the utility space, how that momentum has shown up in the work that you've done and sort of where you're at today?
I think one of the biggest symbols of what's happening, there are sort of two examples that come to mind. One that we've been really intimately involved with, another one that's very related to our work. One is in Maine. There's a group called Our Power that is mounting a statewide ballot initiative campaign to change the ownership of the utilities. The electric utilities there are privately owned companies. They're subsidiaries of foreign companies. They provide terrible service and horrible prices, sort of the combination of everything awful in terms of what a consumer can expect. And so they are inspired by a lot of the work that we've both covered and talked about over many, many years around the importance of ownership of our energy system, looking at a way to change that. So their ballot initiative would fundamentally transform from private ownership to a form of public ownership or consumer ownership of the utilities there, with the ultimate aim really of giving folks a better deal, more reliable, more affordable, cleaner electricity service. And we're also seeing this issue of challenging ownership and incumbent power in a really interesting example out in California. I wrote a commentary on this, and I've been talking for well over a couple of years now about the issue of and the power of investor-owned utility companies owned by Wall Street investors and their monopoly power. And there's a solar company out in California basically saying, hey, if you utility refuse to serve a certain community, which is happening due to their fumbling of maintenance of the grid system, to their concern with wildfires, we would like to serve instead. We would like to provide a full service electricity delivery to these customers that you're not willing to serve. And they're going in front of regulators to argue that they should be given that opportunity, that the utility monopoly really fundamentally has broken down. So we're seeing a lot of exciting development and are really in the thick of kind of the intellectual embrace of this challenge to the monopoly ownership of the energy system and the innovation and activity that can unleash if we challenge it around this issue of scale and ownership.
Chris, I imagine you're seeing something similar, right, in the broadband space, where again, things are dramatically different today than they were a couple of years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And in similar ways, I feel like people's horizons are broadened. There's a sense that new things are possible that may have been considered impractical previously. Frankly, I'm not ready for this year to be over. There's still more of the wave to build. It seems a little bit weird to be picking last year, January-ish to today, just in terms of how the dynamic is going in the broadband space, where we're seeing a lot of good things happening, a lot of focus on digital equity, making sure everyone's connected. But we have absolutely seen a whole new world is developing where local governments are stepping up. We're seeing some states do a really great job. We're seeing other states kind of fumbling the opportunity, and we knew that would happen. And I expected that there would be some surprises, and there are. I don't think it's the same old states you might think of as being well run that are doing everything. So It's exciting. There's been a lot of change, and I think there's a lot more change on the horizon as people are recognizing that they don't have to accept the crummy service, whether it's from the electric company or the broadband company. In both cases, we're seeing that change, and that has to change before we can do other things. Like, absolutely has to happen first.
And Brenda, if I can throw to you this idea that it's not the typical states. I know in a recent podcast we were talking about, like examples in Oklahoma and different states. So can you talk a little bit about how that momentum is showing up, maybe not in the traditional spaces that you might expect when it comes to the composting movement?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just composting. When we're talking reuse, recycling, just kind of the broader waste sector, we're basically looking at replacing the burn and bury waste paradigm with a circular zero waste economy. And it's really great to see so many states leading. If it's we've got examples in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where they are building multi-million-dollar grant programs to build recycling infrastructure. At the local level in DC, I love their new grant program. It's Ditch the Disposable. So there's more focus on reuse than durables, which I love. Hate styrofoam and single-use products. In the composting sector, we're seeing tremendous momentum in building distributed infrastructure and the growth of community composting. And I just love that sector is, there's no one way to, to run those kinds of operations. We have worker-owned co-ops, we have volunteer-run operations, we have youth-engaged enterprises, we have farmers that are getting into the space more and more, rural and urban. And I just love, they're all over the country. I love the names. We have in Montana, Happy Trash Can Curbside Compost. Chicago, it's the Urban Canopy, more of a kind of urban name. In Pennsylvania, one of our members of our coalition is Worms Are Aliens. Not quite sure about that name, but we're seeing, I think the names kind of capture the breadth of the movement. In New York, one of our new members of our coalition is Vines, Volunteers Improving Neighborhood Environments. So kind of capturing the idea that composting is not just about waste reduction, but it's about building healthy soils and improving the social fabric of our communities, bringing people together for a common cause.
And I would just say, Brenda knows this, that I was in Baltimore meeting with a group in a neighborhood that was focused on improving internet access and really moving forward with some interesting plans. And taking a tour of the neighborhood, I saw people working in an area on a composting bin that the composting team had helped to build. And it was just great to see the way in which this community, has a number of different projects that they're working on. But clearly that was one that had resonated, and they've continued to update over the years. And they were, in fact, actually planting some vegetables and some other things that I probably wouldn't eat, but probably you all would, and some nice healthy stuff in the soils that they were creating with that compost. So it was a good day to be there.
Chris, if you were growing your own food in your healthy soil amended with compost, you would be more inclined to eat it.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I don't know.
So Stacey, we haven't heard from you yet. You want to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about what you've been seeing and the momentum that's been building in the independent business space?
Yeah, it's really great to have a chance to think back over the last year or two, because it is really different where we're at right now than where we were even just 2 or 3 years ago. It's pretty remarkable. We're in the trenches day to day on a whole bunch of fights, including this fight in the Senate to try to get Chuck Schumer to bring the big tech bills to a vote. And so you can feel like you're down there fighting for these things that are maybe not going to happen. So it's great to look back at how much has shifted. Some of the things that are really coming to mind for me is, we have got this whole different perspective on antitrust, this body of law that is designed to safeguard our democracy, to safeguard our local communities from concentrated power that has been dormant for 40 years. And over the last few years, there has been this movement to to dust off those laws and start enforcing them again, and really to reinvigorate that. And this year, we're actually really starting to see some of the concrete results of that. And it's like turning around a ship. It's going to take a bit of a while to get it fully turned around, but then the momentum, I think, is going to be really incredible. So one of the things we just saw a few weeks ago is that the Federal Trade Commission, one of the agencies in charge of our antitrust laws, was created back in 1914, I think it is, because Congress recognized that, yes, we can pass the Sherman Act, we can pass these antitrust laws, but we can't cover all of the different kinds of monopoly power problems that are out there. And so we need an expert agency that is charged with policing the system. And so the Congress gave the FTC charge over what the law describes as unfair methods of competition, right? Said you go define what those are, you figure out what those are, and then you stop companies from using them. That's what the FTC is supposed to do. Well, quite a number of years ago, the FTC directly out loud said, yeah, we're not going to really do that anymore. Like we'll enforce the existing antitrust laws, but we're not going to you're not going to deal with this unfair methods of a competition. I mean, they literally did this. They said it directly. And now with Chair Lena Khan and with a commission that really gets it on monopoly problems, just a few weeks ago, they came out with a new policy statement where they said, we are absolutely going to define what is a fair method of competition. And here's an outline of it. And we are now going to make rules about this. And we're going to use this to bring cases against companies. So, it is like a huge momentous shift, and it's going to matter in all kinds of ways, because this is a set of tools that can enable the FTC to go after abusive practices by Amazon, by Walmart, all the big monopoly companies in our economy, with what I hope will be really, important results for local communities.
That's really great. And so, yeah, it's incredibly clear. We've made a ton of progress over the last number of years. The one thing that's not surprising to me, you all were all pretty modest in talking about the work that you've done and how you've contributed to this momentum. And so I'm going to open the floor to us celebrating a little bit and sort of patting ourselves on the back on the ways in which we've been fairly instrumental in making some of this progress.
I'll talk about me.
I knew you.
We knew you were going to be first up there, Chris.
I mean,
the floor is yours.
A year ago, we thought we might get funding to do more tribal broadband boot camps, and we did. And we outlined a series of goals that seemed a little bit nuts in terms of the audacity to do. And we're a few weeks away from, in December, we will hold our 5th event, I believe it'll be. And we have another one in January at Gila River in Arizona. We've incorporated fiber fusion splicing and all kinds of fiber planning type stuff. And the thing that really brought it home, though, is that some of the people that have been with us from the start, and people who started off as kind of being trained, but have gone on now to help train in the next group of people, have received tens of millions of dollars from the federal government to build networks that were altered by, the events that we did. And it's really remarkable to have, brought the right people together so that the Hoopa Valley Nation is able to, go from a kind of a low Audacity wireless plan, which would have been okay and is better than what they have, to connecting everyone with fiber optics, which is what they're on the cusp of doing. And it's just really exciting. And I have no idea where we're going next, but this has been a breakout year for that. And there's just been a lot of different organizations and people that have made it happen. But Matt Rantanen and I are kind of at the top of it all with trying to keep the ball rolling. So it's been a terrific year for that.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That's really, John, I know it's a little sarcastic, but I actually think you have some stuff and maybe want to do some bragging on yourself. So yeah, floor is yours.
I mean, just to emphasize what I mentioned about the Our Power campaign in Maine, we just finished a public power podcast series. So 6 episodes about the idea of public power, covering some of the history of communities that have attempted it, including some that we've been involved in, such as in Minneapolis. Others that we've inspired through the work that we did, through the stories that we told of the efforts that have been done. And I think one of the things that really struck me was that knowing what's happening in Maine, being connected to the folks there, having given them some advice, exchange information and whatnot, realizing that as we were putting this podcast series together, we went back to our library of recordings over the years. We had 2 dozen interviews that we'd done with folks who were exploring this idea of doing public ownership of their utility system, of challenging incumbent power. Many of them didn't get there, but a lot of them were inspired by the work that we did and really even didn't conceive of this idea that they consider public power until they came across some of the work that we had done to explain what it might allow them to do, or the way that that activity would leverage for their community action and take advantage of the authority that they had and the power that they had to make their lives better when it came to the energy sector. So, you know, if our power is successful, am I going to think that I did it myself? No, I mean, there's these folks out there gathering signatures and getting it on the ballot and doing all of that hard work in the ground. But I like to think that a lot of their work has been inspired by the things that we've been talking about for years, and that we help to lay the groundwork for them to conceive of this idea of consumer ownership instead of private ownership as a way to reach many of their ambitious goals.
That's great. How about you, Stacy?
Yeah, well, one of the nice things is that we've had more funding for the independent business program. You go back not that long ago, it was like basically just me, right? And so now there's this whole set of people working with me on this project, and it's amazing to see like what they've been able to do. So, for example, one of the reasons that antitrust issues have been moving so quickly in Washington, D.C. is because ILSR, and particularly through Katie Milani and Lauren Galatly on our team, have organized this coalition of 36 national and local small business organizations that represent like 150,000 small businesses across the country. And so really marshaling all of those voices to be backing what's happening at the FTC and to be pushing Congress to go further and to be running bills in a couple of states to actually change state level antitrust law. So that's been fantastic. I also am really excited about what Kennedy Smith on our team has been doing with advising communities on all of the ARPA funds. Because, through the Recovery Act, communities are getting these dollars and they have an opportunity to do really transformative things to support their local economies for the long run. And so, Kennedy has written a great report and has been doing technical assistance with communities around the country on here's how you can use these dollars to create a grocery store if you don't have one. Here's how you can buy up commercial real estate and use that for community-based economic development. All these terrific ideas, and to see those happening across the country because of her work is really terrific. And then I also just have to say that there's an antitrust case that's been brought against Amazon in California by the California AG. That is a really good case. I think we want to see some more actions against Amazon that get at other problems, but it is, it's built in part on some of the analysis and research that ILSR has done over the years, and through the data that we've compiled and our understanding of Amazon's monopoly, sort of the way that they maintain their monopoly power, the specific mechanisms of their power, and that is what's illuminated in this case that the California AG is going on. Again, not entirely because of our work, certainly, but our intellectual contribution to that is certainly there. So it's exciting to see all of that.
That's great. And then we have Brenda. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, just teeing off of the California example, and to use that, we're seeing in California and follow the money, right? I mean, so much is where's the who gets the money and what's the impact of that money. And in California, a couple of years ago, the California Recycling State Agency gave out $1 million to support distributed community scale composting in disadvantaged communities in California. Well, and again, we weren't the only ones working on this, but we helped lay the groundwork for this. This year, they've now almost increased that pot of money, quadrupled it to $5 million. So we're seeing more investment going that way. We were part of a wider coalition earlier this year with the National Recycling Coalition, Zero Waste USA, and others to make the case that recycling is infrastructure too. In fact, that was the name of the campaign, recycling is infrastructure too. And as a result of that work, the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed earlier this year didn't quite have as much for recycling as for broadband, Chris, but we still got $275 million for the infrastructure for recycling grants, which is huge compared to what the federal government was giving out before. And then there's an additional, I think, 60 million for recycling education. So that's coming in the federal level. We've been really pushing for that money to not only support big industrial sites, but again, this reuse, local recycling, local composting, and we'll see what happens when that money is released. competitively, which is coming any day now.
That's great. So I want to do one last thing before we close up. Stacy, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I also think because we've been talking about, you know, these not isolated, but these individual examples of like what's happening at the community level or shifts that are happening at the federal level and so on. And I just, you know, I think it's really worth remarking on that we are in the midst of a sea change in how this country thinks about economic policy. And there is a growing attention to the idea that we should focus on growing the economy from the ground up. What does it look like when we reshore, when we think about creating local businesses and really this sort of, you know, this idea of localism effectively in terms of economic development, and a real sea change in how our, you know, the broader country thinks about concentrated power and big business, and a lot of skepticism about the road that we've been on in terms of consolidation. So I just want to like step back and also say, in addition to all of these local examples, there is an influence that ILSR has had in this broader shift in thinking that is now helping to generate this kind of momentum.
Yeah, so that makes incredible sense. And I want to close this conversation with sort of a final thought, a final reflection, as we're speaking to people who have taken the time to click on this QR code in our annual report. Like, they really clearly care about our work and want to see us succeed going forward. Give us a sentence, a couple of sentences on sort of what we need, what the continued support that we need to keep building momentum and keep this progress going. Brenda, maybe I can go back to you first and then we'll go around.
Well, just thank you for your support, and that makes all the difference to us and our team and the work we do. And I think one of the things that's a common thread among our initiatives is that we identify the early adopters that are doing this, prove the concept so that the early majority, which is more risk adverse, will understand the success, the benefits, and can make it work. So, you know, your support is helping us grow the work, the early adopters, the shift to things to catch on, whether it's reuse, recycling, composting, or broadband, or local energy systems, whatever it is. This is the work we do, the research and the technical assistance and the information dissemination and building these networks.
John, how about you? Got a sentence or two for the folks as some last thoughts?
I'd just say that, especially when you think about our work in energy, but true of a lot of our work, we are up against some of the biggest corporations in the world that are spending tens of millions of dollars on advertising, on lobbying, on campaign spending. And so like every dollar that we can get is pushing back against that power and trying to give communities more space to, you know, present the solutions that they want to have. So it really is, it's an uphill fight. And that's why I'm just so grateful for everybody's support.
That's great. Chris, final thoughts? You're muted.
Of course I am. I didn't want to follow Stacy, so that's nice. Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, we take the responsibility seriously when people support us with their money, and I think we are very effective. We focus on novel solutions, and frankly, getting those donations is also just like, I think, buoys our spirit, because all of us win sometimes but lose often, and it's great knowing that we have so many supporters out there.
Yeah, and Stacy, we'll let you close it up.
Yeah, thank you so much to our donors. You know, individual donations are not only a significant part of our budget in terms of the size, but they're like magic dollars, because they're the dollars that we use to do the kind of cutting edge things that are not yet like ready to convince like a foundation to fund. It's what has enabled us, for example, to be out on the leading edge, looking at the problems caused by the dollar chains and their kind of predatory business model, for example. Now a lot of people are onto that, but when we started doing that work, it was because we had donors who were funding us and enabling us to do that. So really appreciate their outsized importance in our work.
All right. So thank you all. Appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you next time around.